Imagine someone just, walks up and hands you an instruction manual.
Okay.
But it's not for, like, a new microwave or a piece of flat pack furniture. It is this dense, incredibly detailed manual for the entire universe.
Oh, well, just the whole universe.
Right. It explains the precise mechanics of how everything started, the underlying code of how it operates right now, and exactly how it is all going to end. And crucially, it's not just sitting quietly on a desk somewhere. The person handing it to you is looking you dead in the eye, and the manual itself is practically vibrating with urgency.
Like it's ticking.
Exactly, like a countdown timer. They're essentially telling you, read this immediately, the house is on fire.
Which creates this really incredible tension, right?
Yeah.
Because you are being handed a textbook that requires deep, methodical study, but you're being told to consume it with the adrenaline of a survival situation.
Yeah, that tension is exactly what we are exploring today. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a document that does exactly that. We managed to get our hands on a promotional flyer. It's a detailed overview and marketing advertisement for a book titled Understanding the Global Plan.
The subtitle is The Sciences of Soteriology and Eschatology
by Dr. Jules Montelnor.
So our mission today is to examine how incredibly complex, high-level theological concepts are packaged, structured, and presented to, the everyday person. We're going to look at the rhetorical strategies that turn a thick academic text into this must-read, pass-it-on survival guide for you and everyone you know.
Right, and we should probably be really clear up front about our role today.
Definitely.
We are essentially acting as, I guess you could call it, literary and rhetorical cartographers, because the source material deals heavily in religious doctrines, biblical prophecies, and some very specific theological viewpoints.
Yeah, so our mission is just to map out the claims made in the text and analyze how the message is constructed and marketed. We are looking at the architecture of the argument here. We are not endorsing or taking sides on the theology itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we dive into the actual architecture and the heavy theological terminology that comes with it, we really need to look at the foundation. We need to establish the why.
The problem is trying to solve.
Right. Any good marketing document has to establish a need before it actually sells you the product. So what specific problem in the world is this document claiming to fix?
Well, the text doesn't hide the ball here at all. It points directly to what it calls a crisis of gospel confusion in our generation.
A crisis. That's a strong word.
Very strong. The author describes a world that is desperate for hope, truth, and biblical clarity. So the marketing begins with this massive sweeping diagnosis of a global condition. It is painting a picture of a modern era that is chaotic, fragmented, and basically lost in a fog of spiritual and informational noise. The underlying premise is that people are anxious because they just don't understand the overarching narrative. They don't see the big picture.
And stepping out of that fog to offer a solution is the author, Dr. Jules Montelnor. And the document hits us with a very deliberate, very heavy list of credentials right away.
Oh yeah, it really fronts the authority.
Yeah, he is presented as a doctor of theology and divinity, an international evangelist, and an outreach ministries director. So he isn't just like a casual observer. He is positioned as this highly decorated expert offering a systematic study of God's redemptive purpose from creation to eternity.
Which is an incredibly massive scope.
It really is. It brings to mind this image of a massive architectural blueprint. It's like someone looking at a highly chaotic, confusing modern world and saying, hey, here is the single master blueprint, a global plan to make sense of every single piece of the universe. But I have to push back here a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
For anyone familiar with theology, covering literally everything from the beginning of creation to eternity is usually the job of a massive, multi-volume, systematic theology set. I mean, is it a bit unusual or maybe audacious to confidently claim to resolve gospel confusion in a single volume?
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of that ambition and how that ambition actually serves as a psychological anchor for the reader.
A psychological anchor? How do you mean?
Well, yes, it is a massive flex to condense that scope into one accessible volume. But that is the core rhetorical power of this document. It is attempting to bridge faith, reason, and chaotic real-world events all in one centralized location.
I see.
By offering a systematic study to a world it just described as desperate and confused, the document is providing immediate psychological comfort. The author is leveraging those heavy academic and pastoral credentials to implicitly say, look, I have done the rigorous historical and biblical investigations so you don't have to.
Right, I've done the homework for you.
Exactly. He's saying, I've organized the chaos. Here is the map. It projects this overwhelming sense of calm, structured authority into a situation that, remember, it just defined as a crisis.
The promise of absolute order is incredibly seductive when the alternative is absolute chaos.
For sure.
So let's open up this map and look at how this grand blueprint is actually organized. The book uses two massive foundational sciences to structure this global plan. The first one is soteriology. And for those listening who know the space, soteriology deals with salvation.
Yes, and the document defines it here literally as the complete doctrine of salvation.
Right. So if the overarching global plan is the macro blueprint for the universe, soteriology is kind of the micro schematic for the individual human soul.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. And the text outlines a very specific logical progression here. It starts at the root of the problem with the human condition and the fall. Then it introduces the structural solution, which it calls God's divine provision in Christ.
Which naturally leads to the next step.
Yeah, finally it details the personal application of that solution, listing regeneration, justification, and adoption.
Which are very weighty terms.
Let's actually hold on those last three terms for a second. Regeneration, justification, adoption. These aren't just warm, inspirational buzzwords. These are precise, heavy theological mechanisms.
They really are.
It sounds like a highly structured legal process, almost like you're reading the clauses of a complex contract. And the document leans even further into this academic weight. It highlights the inclusion of concepts like the Ordo Salutis, which it helpfully translates as the order of salvation.
Right.
It also mentions the 5 core doctrines of the gospel, and even advertises that it covers both Reformed and dispensational perspectives.
Which is a lot to pack into a promotional flyer.
That's exactly what I'm hung up on, these academic terms. The target audience for this flyer includes every believer. If I'm buying a book to give my neighbor hope in a chaotic world, dropping debates about dispensational perspectives on them feels like a great way to put them to sleep.
Yeah, I can see why you'd think that.
I mean, is this a marketing misstep, or is there a specific psychological reason Dr. Montemore is flexing this academic muscle in an ad?
It's definitely not a misstep. It is a highly calculated dual-purpose strategy. First of all, Dr. Montemore is explicitly targeting pastors and theologians as well, promising to equip them with biblical depth.
So he's talking to the pros, essentially.
Exactly. By deploying a term like Ordo Salutis, which refers to the logical sequence of conceptual steps involved in salvation, and by mentioning Reformed versus dispensational perspectives, he is signaling to the ministerial crowd that this book has serious scholarly teeth.
Okay, that makes sense.
He is proving he understands the tension between Reformed theology, which often emphasizes God's sovereign election, and dispensationalism, which categorizes biblical history into distinct eras of God's administration. Synthesizing or addressing both of those in one volume is a massive academic undertaking.
So for the scholars, it's proof of rigor. They see those words and think, okay, this guy knows his stuff. But what about the layperson, the guy next door?
Well, for the everyday believer, the mere presence of those heavy academic frameworks actually builds trust, even if they don't fully grasp the nuances.
Really? Just seeing the big words makes them feel better.
Think about the Ordo Salutis. By framing salvation as an order or a sequence, the author is presenting salvation not as a mysterious, unpredictable whim of the cosmos, but as a logical, ironclad supply chain of the soul.
A supply chain of the soul. That's a fascinating way to put it.
Yeah, moving from the human condition to divine provision to the exact sequence of regeneration, justification, and adoption shows the reader that the mechanics of their faith are fully mapped out. It reassures them that their personal spiritual state is anchored in a highly structured, scientifically theological process.
Ah, I get it now.
The academic jargon functions kind of like the steel beams inside a building. You might not see them or fully understand metallurgy, but you feel much safer knowing they are there holding the roof up.
That makes a lot of sense. The complexity is the comfort. But, knowing the internal structural mechanics of your own salvation doesn't bring you much peace if you wake up every morning feeling like the outside world is randomly spinning into an apocalyptic disaster.
Very true.
That's why the text doesn't stop at the individual. It has to zoom out to the cosmic timeline. And that brings us to the second science structuring this blueprint: eschatology. The text defines this as God's prophetic timeline and end times.
Precisely. So soteriology is the personal micro level, and eschatology is the historical and future macro level. And notice how the document builds credibility for this section.
Yeah, it doesn't just jump into predicting the end of the world.
Right. The very first bullet point under eschatology doesn't start by making wild future predictions. It actually starts by looking backward. It highlights more than 300 prophecies Jesus fulfilled.
That specific data point really jumped out at me. The author is essentially reverse engineering the future using past blueprints.
That's a great way to describe it.
Before he asks you to trust his specific timeline for the end of the world, he uses those 300 fulfilled prophecies as, like, structural physics. He is demonstrating that the prophetic timeline has a 100% success rate historically, which logically implies it's going to hold up in the future.
And once that historical anchor is set, the document walks the reader through an incredibly detailed sequential timeline of future events. It lists the signs of the end times, the return of Christ, the rapture of the church, the tribulation period, the millennium, final judgment, and finally, the eternal state.
It's literally a theological master clock. It details exact, distinct phases like rapture, tribulation, and millennium, treating them like concrete historical eras, but projected into the future.
And here is the crucial rhetorical pivot the document makes. We often associate the concept of end times or eschatology with cinematic disaster, fear, and apocalyptic dread.
Oh yeah, totally. Mad Max, asteroids, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But the source explicitly promises to connect global events through prophecy to provide hope, readiness, and God's sovereignty. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is using this timeline to fundamentally reframe modern anxiety.
Because if the terrifying events you see on the news are actually tied to a specific pre-written prophecy, then they aren't evidence of a world out of control.
No, they're not.
They're evidence of a world that is perfectly on schedule.
That is the exact mechanism of comfort being offered here. If a reader looks at global instability and feels panic, this book offers a lens that transforms that panic into readiness.
Yeah.
The chaos isn't random. It is merely the fulfillment of the next tick on that master clock.
Oh.
It asserts that God's sovereignty is firmly in place. Remember the crisis of gospel confusion we talked about at the very beginning?
Yeah, the fog of noise.
This hyper-structured timeline is presented as the ultimate antidote to that confusion.
Which brings us to a really fascinating pivot in the document. We have spent all this time establishing these incredibly dense, massive frameworks. We're talking about the Ordo Salutis, the historical tension between Reformed and dispensational theology, the tribulation period, and this massive theological master clock.
Heavy stuff.
Incredibly heavy. And then the document abruptly shifts gears to focus on who is supposed to read this book and how we are supposed to get it into their hands. And the marketing takes a surprisingly cheerful, almost aggressive turn.
It really does. The target audience listed is incredibly broad. Almost aggressively so, like you said. It lists pastors, theologians, every believer, churches, and international evangelists.
That is everyone.
It is a massive demographic net to cast for a single theological text, essentially claiming it is vital reading for literally everyone.
But the real shock, at least for me, is in the gifting section.
Oh, the gifting section.
Despite the heavy life or death theological weight of the content, the flyer prominently promotes the book as a perfect gift, with an exclamation mark, for birthdays, holidays, graduations, and every occasion. I have to pause and appreciate the intense juxtaposition here.
It's quite something.
Imagine unwrapping a festive birthday present from a colleague, tearing off the wrapping paper, and surprise. It's a rigorous academic breakdown of the coming tribulation period and your ultimate eternal state. It is a wild marketing strategy to pair global end times with a high school graduation gift.
It is a jarring juxtaposition, but it becomes even more intense when you read the direct quote from the author placed right next to those cheerful gifting suggestions.
Yes, Dr. Montalmore's quote is incredibly heavy. He writes, "This book was never intended to be just another volume on your shelf. The truth contained within is too urgent, too vital. Jesus is coming soon. Are you ready?"
Yeah, that's not your typical birthday card message.
Not at all, and I want to dig into that. How does injecting that direct, highly urgent quote change the fundamental tone of this document? Because we go from a standard e-commerce book advertisement to something entirely different in that moment.
This raises an important question about the psychological shift the author is actually trying to achieve here. That, quote, completely alters the nature of the transaction between the reader and the text.
How so?
Well, you are no longer just a consumer buying a book to learn something new. The author is actively transitioning the reader from education to mobilization.
Mobilization.
Yes. by stating that the truth is too vital to just sit on a shelf, and by explicitly invoking the imminent ticking clock of Jesus' return, Dr. Mondelor is attempting to deputize the reader.
Deputize them, that's the perfect word for it. You aren't just an audience member anymore, you are suddenly a participant in the global plan itself.
And the document cements this deputization by concluding with a very specific passage of Scripture. At the very end of the flyer, it cites Romans 10.14 to 15.
What does that passage say?
It asks a series of rhetorical questions. It says, how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news?
Let's trace the logic the document is building here. By logging onto Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Thrift Books, buying a copy of this book and handing it to your neighbor or a recent graduate, the advertisement is suggesting that you are the person fulfilling that scripture.
Exactly.
You become the one with the beautiful feet bringing the good news.
That is the ultimate rhetorical maneuver of this entire promotional piece. It frames the very mundane act of buying, gifting, and distributing a book as an active form of preaching.
Wow.
It elevates a basic e-commerce transaction, ordering a text published by Outreach International Global Ministries, into the fulfillment of a global divine mandate.
It transfers the burden of the urgency. The author feels the urgency, writes the book, and then passes the ticking manual to you. Now, if you just put it on your shelf, you are failing the mandate. You have to buy more. You have to distribute them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You aren't just giving a somewhat intense birthday gift. You are potentially altering someone's eternal destiny and fulfilling a biblical command to spread the word before the master clock runs out.
It's brilliant marketing.
It is a brilliant, highly effective way of generating personal urgency and encouraging bulk distribution. It relies completely on the reader internalizing the crisis that the book established on page 1.
So, when we step back and look at the entire architecture of this document, understanding the global plan serves as a truly fascinating case study in communication and persuasion. We see how rigorous, highly systematized theology, the massive, intricate mechanics of soteriology and eschatology are packaged not as dry academic theory, but as an urgent, world-explaining survival guide.
Right.
It takes the infinite, ungraspable concepts of salvation and the end of the universe and distills them into a bolded list that is marketed to everyone from a seasoned scholar to the guy living across the street.
And at its core, this document highlights a fundamental, universal human drive. Regardless of where any listener stands on the specific theology presented, the text reveals how deeply we all crave structure and legibility.
We want things to make sense.
Exactly. In a modern world that often feels overwhelmingly confusing, chaotic, and totally devoid of narrative sense, a text that promises a comprehensive global plan holds immense psychological power. A document that confidently asserts that the past is accounted for, the present personal experience is provided for, and the ultimate future is meticulously mapped out, offers a profound emotional anchor.
It provides the reader with a sense of control, and through that brilliant marketing pivot at the end we talked about, a sense of active participation in a narrative that is vastly larger than themselves. For you listening right now, whether your main interest lies in the nuances of theology, the psychology of marketing, or simply observing how human beings seek to find order and hope in a chaotic world,